we're always confronted with the idea of, do we consume now or save for the future?
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a tension that happens at different points of our lives. Hey, Nick.
Scott, what's going on?
It's another week. Here we are. Real Personal Finance. Let's go.
Let's dive right in today. I'm excited. It looks like we got a listener question.
We do have a listener question. I'm so grateful for listener questions. If you have a question, feel free to submit. Just simply go down to the show notes and hit submit a question. Send it on in. We'd love to hear from you. And yes, we have a great question today. And it's timely because there's some little tweaks and changes that have happened to some retirement accounts. It's great for everyone to know.
That's right. We'll dive into it. It's keeping us busy with all the different legislation and stand up to date on all the tax laws.
There's always something going on. So the question comes from Nathan. Nathan, thank you for sending it in. And his bit is he started listening to our podcast a few months ago and has enjoyed learning from us. Thank you. And he works in higher education, where he has a more conservative compensation model that's offset by some significant retirement support. So his current institution requires 5% savings rate from him into the 401k, and they match 8.5% of his salary to the 401k. Awesome. And his question is, what is the maximum contribution that he can make? Does that maximum apply to just what he contributes, or does he have to count what's contributed by his employer? He is earning in the mid 150s through this year and is curious if he's going to be limited in the near future by the maximum he's allowed to put in that, or if he needs to put it into another vehicle. And he is invested additionally about $1,000 a month into a brokerage account. Good job. And he's wondering if he should partially reallocate some of that to his retirement account or what. And he's 45, planning to continue work for 20 years. And thanks for any insights. Wonderful question.
We got a lot going on here. I'm excited to break it down. When I hear this, I hear savings rates, I hear contribution limits, hear a little bit of retirement planning, tax planning. And so as we dive into it, where do you want to start?
Well, I think let's just start with the idea of contributions to workplace retirement accounts. So, he mentioned a 401k. A lot of other institutions, if they're not for profit, there'll be a 403b. And then sometimes those institutions also have another plan called a 457. But for today, let's just focus on what would be like the 401k and 403b. Does that sound fair?
Mm-hmm.
So you and I both know that the maximum the employee gets to contribute is capped at a number, but it also goes up with inflation. So in our careers, we've watched this number go up over time. And the maximum number that we as employees are allowed to put into 401ks or 403b plans this year, in 2025, is $23,500.
There's a catch for that, right? If we're under the age of 50, that number is exactly correct, right? That's what we like to call the elective deferral. That's the amount that comes out of our paycheck that we're responsible for being able to max out that pre-tax or that retirement plan, 401k, 457, 403b. Now the rules change a little bit, right? Once you hit age 50, it's a special number. You get what's called a catch-up provision. Those numbers also change every year. Right now, it's $7,500. And there's this new little wrinkle that I believe just started through the Secure Act 2.0.
I love where you're headed, and I'm just going to put a pin in what you just said. So people under 50 can put away a max of $23,500. And then just think about it. It's just the way that saving works. If you haven't saved enough to retire in the future and you get into your 50s, you're going to have to increase your savings to try to be okay when you retire. So the government went and said, okay, you're allowed to put away more. You can put away an extra $7,500 or $31,000 total.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But to your point, now there's this new act called Secure 2.0 that passed recently. And with that, there's another provision on catch-ups. Tell us about that.
It's a strange one. This one got me reading a little bit. And if you're between the ages of 60 and 63, so
it's so random.
4-year window.
Yes.
Right. I feel like that's going to be a future test question for, someone coming into their career, taking their
That's
CFP.
definitely a CFP question in the future. Yes.
because man, do these charts change every year, right? I remember taking my exam and they were very different numbers. So,
Absolutely.
So for that small group or subset of people from 60 to 63, to Scott's point, not only do you have that extra $7,500 as a catch up, right? But you also have an additional 3,750. Basically, the number between the catch up and the additional amount is 11,250.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to use round numbers and make it easy. We're going to make it a little difficult.
Well, the simpler answer is what they did was they said, hey, if you're really in a bad place and you're in your 60s and you haven't saved enough, we'll let you not only contribute that 7,500, but whatever that number is, you can take that number times 150%, and that's the new catch-up amount you get for those 4 years.
And so I think I go back to Nathan's question. One of the things that he had in there was, does the amount that he contributes plus what his employer contributes, does that count towards that maximum number? And when I look at it, one thing that a lot of people may not know is the amount that you could put into these qualified savings plans is actually bigger than this number that we just shared. There's actually two components to it. There's you as the employee, and then there's what we call either the profit sharing or the employer contributions. And those are two separate amounts. So that's a great question, Nathan. The amount that you're contributing is just your portion that you're responsible for. And then your employer will have their own respective portion within your plan. And so when we look at the total number of what is the maximum amount that you could fill that 401k bucket up with, I believe the number, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong here, those numbers change all the time, is $70,000 for this year.
Yeah, so you're 100% correct. And so you got to think of it as Nathan gets to put away up to $23,500 because he's under age 50. And then his employer's making a contribution as well, currently 8.5%. But they could actually contribute a whole lot more to that and get him up to $70,000. Another thing that can happen is sometimes you may have heard of this idea called a backdoor Roth conversion or a mega backdoor Roth conversion. Well, people will use that 70,000 number. They'll put the 23,500 into their 401k normally, and then they'll do after-tax contributions and convert it to Roth up to that 70,000 number as well. So there's a few different ways you can think about that number, but that number is essentially all of my employee contributions, any of my after-tax contributions, and any of the employer contributions combined. And the only thing you need to add to that is that catch-up provision that we mentioned earlier, you always get to put the catch-up provision on top of that employer-employee number. So for someone who's over the age of 50 this year, they could potentially put away up to $81,250. Which is bananas.
It's a lot of money. And then there's one other strange little wrinkle in there just to keep it interesting. If you make over $145,000, that catch-up amount has to be made towards a Roth portion of the 401k. Anything below 145, you could do pre-tax, get that tax deduction. So don't want to get too lost in the weeds, but just a little interesting curve there just to pay attention.
That's super wonky stuff, I'm sure, to get this bill passed, to make sure that the tables worked. And essentially what they're saying is, hey, person over 60, you want to put away that additional 33,000 and change, you can do that, but it has to be to a Roth. So you pay taxes on it before it goes in. That's ultimately what it is. But to Nathan, to answer your question very specifically, now that we've been through all of that, you are contributing 5% of your salary, which if you said the mid 150s, so that would put you at about, I'm just saying $155,000. So that would mean you're contributing $7,750 to this plan. You would still be able to contribute an additional $15,750 before you hit that full max of $23,500. Or 10% of your income. So you essentially could save 15% of your salary to the 401k if you wanted to.
And one of the things I see here in the question too from Nathan is that he's also investing an additional $1,000 a month as brokerage.
Yeah.
I thought this was really interesting because a lot of times we see people just save everything into their 401k.
Yep.
And that creates, a lot of rigidity when emergencies come. And it's important to have different accounts for different reasons. And so Nathan also asks, he's got a future car purchase. And I think it'd be important
I actually reread that. I think he might mean investment vehicle.
All right.
But I'm going to go, I like your idea of car. I like your idea of car because it could come down to like, what if I have more cash flow needs? So we can look at it.
He's using our jargon. I like it. Nathan.
Yes, he used jargon for sure. But to your point, where you're going, I think go with where you were carrying that, because I think even if it was meant to that angle, it's an important angle to look at.
So when we look at where we're saving, a couple different things. Like we could look at where we're at today and future flexibility. We could also look at when Nathan 20 years from now is in retirement and it comes to, okay, well, how do we take this money out in the most tax efficient way? But for today, when we start looking at where we're saving, with Nathan having that extra $1,000 in a brokerage account, it provides him future flexibility. Mm-hmm. We have to remember with these qualified plans, the 401k, 403b, 457, we have some handcuffs on it. We sometimes, right, plan provisions will allow us to take a loan out from it. But a lot of times if we're taking a distribution, there's going to be taxes and penalties that we have to incur. Yep. Whereas a brokerage account, it gives us a lot of flexibility to start being able to take out money without penalty. We just have it there, right? And then how it's taxed is also different too. Whether an ordinary income, brokerage, it would be more capital gains, right? How much did the account grow and earn? How do we, get the money out? No,
really good point. And I think if we look overall, for like how's Nathan doing, there's so much that we don't know. But what we do know is with roughly what his salary is, and the savings that he's doing to the taxable account, like you were saying, and then the contribution that he's making and the match that's happening for him, matches count as savings. Mm-hmm. They do. You and I were talking earlier that if someone is making a lot of money, we personally as advisors don't like to count that contribution toward their savings rate because we want to see them making that contribution and living off of a means that they can sustain for longer periods of time. But when we're in, a six-figure salary is a lot of money. That's nothing to shake a head at. It just depends on where that six-figure salary is, right? Like if you're in Southern California, that does not feel like a tremendous amount of money versus like growing up in the Midwest, that feels like so much more money. The dollar can go a lot further there. But he's saving 21% of his income with the employer match, his savings to the 401k and taxable account. That's amazing.
Oh, that's Nathan. If you stay on this trajectory, as you suggest in your question, for the next 20 years, you're going to be so far ahead, right? And so this notion of like, we don't need to have a reason to save. We just save because what does it do? Like, what is, if we ask ourselves the purpose of saving, it's for future flexibility. And so when we start looking at what I like to refer to as this matrix of savings, which is how much of our income should we save as a percentage, and should we count that match versus not, right? Depending on our baseline of where we're starting from, meaning how much you already have saved and accumulated, right? That number can go down as we get closer to retirement if we have a larger nest egg, if we have a larger investment account. And so with what you have right now, depending at 20%, just continuing on in the future for the next 20 years, as your question suggests, you're going to come out really far ahead.
And I think that the questions, thinking about like other considerations for Nathan that just things that you and I were chatting about, we'd want to think about as we, if for his own frame of helping himself, what's his tax rate? Mm-hmm. So, if he's single, his tax rate is probably 24%, right? But if he's married, it's going to be less. Mm-hmm. And that determines what bracket he's in, tax bracket he's in, might help him determine the choice of these funds going into my 401k. Do I want them to be Roth contributions or do I want them to be pre-tax contributions? That's something to weigh. That's another thought to have. And that gets to your point of the flexibility that you have in the future. What's the tax location look like for his overall balance sheet? How much of it's in pre-tax investments? How much of it's in that brokerage account? Does he have a Roth that he's not mentioning here? Or did he already are all of these 403b contributions or 401k contributions to the Roth component already? Those would be interesting considerations to think about. And then, of course, the other would just simply be, well, how much do you already have saved and what's the asset allocation of those assets? Because you can just take those assets and put a number on it for the next 20 some years to see what's it roughly going to be worth in the future. How much do I really need to be saving right now? Am I saving enough, or am I saving too much or too little? That's kind of the underlying question that we all want to know. And I think to your point, you kind of mentioned before, because we were talking about vehicle. I read vehicle the first time as car too. But then when we read through it the second time, I realized I think he meant like investment vehicle. But
That's right.
We're always confronted with the idea of, do we consume now or save for the future?
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a tension that happens at different points of our lives, right? When you have little ones in your life, expenses go up. Later in life, when they leave, expenses go down. That's just one example. There's so many examples, but it's a matter of just looking at, where am I now? What's my savings rate? What's my spending rate? What's my debts? What's my taxes? How do I feel about that right now? And what do I want to change about that for myself? That's the frame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and then it's just all about coming back to the big picture.
I like that. Well, I think we should definitely talk on the big picture, because I think sometimes we get too hung up on this personal savings rate where it has to be this hard and fast, tried and true number that we can never deviate from. But when we go back to the purpose of saving, with it being flexibility, it then allows us to say whether, depending on how we're reading this question, if there is a vehicle like a car that comes in, or with kids, major life events, we could hit the pause button, right? Because what we've now done by forcing ourselves to save, let's say we're hitting that 20% benchmark, we now have proven to ourselves that we have that leftover money, whether we're saving it or we're using it for a life event that pops up.
Yeah.
Once that life event transitions, we now can go back to saving it. And so it does create that flexibility. And so know that hard and fast rule of 20% or wherever you're at, know that it comes with some flexibility. And so when we go back to this bigger picture, I can get lost in the weeds, certainly, of Nathan, when you retire, and what Scott talked about earlier of tax location. I love the brokerage account. It is the unsung hero of retirement personally, because you have so much flexibility. I love the Roth, right? And so being able to look at where is our first dollar going to come from in retirement, and where do we take our money out from?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But when we look into the bigger picture, it's what is this for? What are we saving for? And is there that alignment in your life right now that allows you not to put away so much money to have that enjoyment, rather than just putting it 20 years out in the future? So how are you using your money today, right?
Absolutely. It's going back to the bigger picture, to your point. It's looking at what are the things that need to happen in my life to feel like I'm flourishing, that I'm living a great life. Mm-hmm. Do I have those in my life already? And if I don't, look at the challenges. This is where the money comes together with the balance sheet. And we look at how do we reposition these things to help you live a great life now while preparing for the future. It sounds like he's preparing for the future well. There's, of course, some things we don't know to have clarity on that. But he's doing well overall. And I think it's just a matter of using that nuance to live into life and use money as a tool. Don't think of it as the thing.
Mm-hmm. Doing a great job, Nathan. I think that's a great question too. So way to go.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. Feel free to submit other questions, because we love them and want to help you guys. And if you, oftentimes people think I don't know, it's just a question for me. But here's the deal. You're always welcome to be anonymous by just saying anonymous, or give your first name and we'll say your first name. We'll never give more detail than that. And if you have the question, I guarantee someone else does.
That's absolutely right. And one of our favorite things to do is to tie it back to the bigger picture, right? So this could be one question maybe you're hung up on, but trying to, throughout future episodes, tie it to this bigger idea of, once we have that question answered, what does it unlock for your future, right? Scott mentioned it earlier, money's a tool. And so our job here is to create alignment, avoid any confusion, and get you on your best path for retirement, future, independence when it comes to money. So looking forward to so many other questions. Yeah.
And as we're wrapping up today, I think, of what I heard today, thinking about what's actionable for someone listening, what is your total savings rate between your employer and your employee match? What tax rate are you in? Do you want to think about pre-tax where you're in a higher tax bracket, or Roth contributions when you're in a lower tax bracket, or some blend of the two if you're in between? Mm-hmm. And then what else are you saving? So what's your total savings rate? And then just take a look at that and take it from there.
Well said, Scott.
Well, cheers, guys. See you next time.